This is your full audio recording for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I will be reading the first half of the story for this video. I am also going to be taking some notes over here on the side to help you keep up with some of the most important information, and I'll have our questions right here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I can point over to some of them as we get to them. All right. So, as the poem begins, Arthur and his knights are gathered to celebrate Christmas and the New Year with feasting and revelry. In the midst of their festivities, an enormous man who is entirely green bounds through the door. So, this feast is taking place between Christmas and New Year's Day, and that is important. Splendid that knight errant stood in splay of green. Here's a great picture of him. It looks exactly like the description. We'll go to it again in a minute. Splendid that knight errant stood in splay of green, and green too was the mane of his mighty destrier. Fair fanning tresses enveloped the fighting man's shoulders, and over his breast hung a beard as big as a bush. The beard and the huge mane burgeoning forth from his head were clipped off clean in a straight line over his elbows, and the upper half of each arm was hidden underneath as if covered by a king's chaperon closed round the neck. The mane of the marvelous horse was much the same, well crisped and combed and carefully pranked with knots. Threads of gold interwoven with the glorious green. Now a thread of hair, now another thread of gold. The tail of the horse and the forelock were tricked the same way, and both were bound up with a band of brilliant green, adorned with glittering jewels the length of the dock, then caught up tight with a thong in a crisscross knot, where many a bell tinkled brightly, all burnished gold. So monstrous a mount, so mighty a man in the saddle, was never once encountered on all this earth till then. His eyes like lightning flashed, and it seemed to many a man that any man who clashed with him would not long stand. So you can see that the description that is given there is all rendered in this painting very well. The locks of the horse's hair, the fact that he is all in green, even his horse is green, and he looks very fierce. He's got these red yellow eyes. He looks very fierce. The questions on here we have not quite gotten to. Those are in the next section. But you have in here a lot of alliteration that we pointed out. This was the alliterative King Arthur. So we have over his breast hung a beard as big as a bush. It's a really big beard. You can see it there. And so monstrous a mount, so mighty a man. Make sure you're using these side notes to help you explain, to help you understand some of these medieval vocabulary words like a knight errant and a destrier is a horse. Burgeoning means growing. Those are important notes. All right. Also note that the structure of this poem is that it is going to have about 20 lines and then ends with four shorter lines that rhyme. And that is important to note that it's got these longer lines that do not rhyme, but then these last four lines, this quatrain of lines, does include rhyme. All right. But the huge man came unarmed, without helmet or hauberk, no breastplate or gorget or iron cleats on his arms. He brought neither shield nor spear shaft to shove or to smite, but instead he held in one hand a bough of the holly that grows most green when all the groves are bare, and held in the other an axe, immense and unwieldy, a pitiless battle blade terrible to tell of. I think it's funny how they say he's unarmed, but then they say he has a big giant axe. He's pointing at these people. Um, it looks kind of small there, but it's a really big axe. And he is holding a bough of holly. A bough means a branch of holly. That was one of your questions, I think. King Arthur stared down at the stranger before the high dais and greeted him nobly, for nothing on earth frightened him. Him here meaning King Arthur. Nothing frightened King Arthur. And he said to him here being the Green Knight, Sir, you are welcome in this place. I am the head of this court. They call me Arthur. Get down from your horse, I beg you, and join us for dinner. And then whatever you seek we will gladly see to. But the stranger said, No, so help me God on high, my errand is hardly to sit at my ease in your castle. But, friend, since your praises are sung so far and wide, your castle the best ever built, people say, and your barons the stoutest men in steel armor that ever rode steeds, most mighty and most worthy of all mortal men, and tough devils to toy with in tournament games. And since courtesy is in flower in this court, they say, all these tales in truth have drawn me to you at this time. You may be assured by this holly branch I bear that I come to you in peace, not spoiling for battle. If I'd wanted to come in finery, fixed up for fighting, I'd have back at home both a helmet and a hauberk, a shield and sharp spear that shines like fire, and other weapons that I know pretty well how to use. But since I don't come here for battle, my clothes are mere cloth. Now, if you are truly as bold as the people all say, you will grant me gladly the little game that I ask as my right. Arthur gave him answer and said, Sir noble knight, if it's a duel you're after, we'll furnish your fight. So he says, that the knight comes in peace, and you can tell that he comes in peace because he has a holly branch that he is bearing, and that is symbolic. Holly branch is symbolic of peace, not symbolic of peaches. And he also says he has no weapons except that axe and no armor. And so he demands a game. He wants to play a game. And King Arthur says, Well, if you want a duel, we'll supply you with that. But now the good knight, the green knight, answers, Good heavens, I want no such thing. I assure you, sire, you've nothing but beardless babes about this bench. If I were hasped in my armor and high on my horse, you haven't a man that could match me. Your might is so feeble. And so all I ask of this court is a Christmas game. For the Yule is here, and New Year's, and here sit young men. If any man holds himself here in this house so hardy, so bold in his blood, and so brainless in his head, that he dares to stoutly exchange one stroke for another, I shall let him have as my present this lovely gizzarm, which is a battle axe. This axe, as heavy as he'll need to handle as he likes, and I will abide the first blow, bare necked as I sit. If anyone here has the daring to try what I've offered, leap to me lightly, lad, lift up this weapon. I give you the thing forever, you may think it your own, and I will stand still for your stroke, ready on the floor, provided you honor my right, when my inning comes, to repay. But let the respite be a 12-month and a day. Come now, my boys, let's see what any here can say. And so, this game that he wants to play, he wants to exchange strokes, which is the same thing as strikes. So, he says he's going to give the knight the axe, the same one that he has brought with him. And he says, First, you swing at the knight, then he will swing at you a year and a day later. And so that is the game they're going to play. That is the Christmas game. Notice how up at first he was saying these are the mightest and most worthy of all mortal men, the stoutest men in steel armor, who are tough devils to toy with in tournament games. But then down here, after Arthur says, Hey, do you want a duel? He says, No, no, no. Look around. These are nothing but beardless babes about this bench, who are brainless in their head. If any of them even think they're hardy enough to go against me. So he kind of changes his tune a little bit to call out these knights to play his game. And let's see how they respond to his offer. Come now, my boys, he says. Let's see what any here can say. If they were like stone before, they were stiller now. Every last lord in the hall, both the high and the low, the stranger on his destrier, stirred in the saddle, and ferociously his red eyes rolled around. He lowered his grisly eyebrows, glistening green, and waved his beard and waited for someone to rise. When no one answered, he coughed as if embarrassed, and drew himself up straight and spoke again. "What! Can this be King Arthur's court?" said the stranger, "whose renown runs through many a realm flung far and wide? What has become of your chivalry and your conquest, your greatness of heart and your chivalry, and your grimness and grand words? Behold the radiance and renown of the mighty Round Table, overwhelmed by a word out of one man's mouth. You shiver and blanch before a blow's been shown." And with that he laughed so loud that the lord was distressed. In chagrin, his blood shot up in his face and limbs so fair. So this lord is King Arthur. The Green Knight is laughing at his knight, and so now his blood shot up in his face and limbs so fair, more angry he was than the wind, and likewise each man there, and Arthur, bravest of men, decided now to draw near. So he's kind of calling him out there. See if you have a question. What does he want to do? How long do they have? Oh, nope, no question about it. So he's kind of mocking them here. He says, "What's become of your chivalry? Now look at you all just shivering and blanching, just at my very voice." But that made King Arthur mad that he was insulting his knight. So he says, he being King Arthur here, he says, "By heaven, sir, your request is strange, but since you have come here for folly, you may as well find it. I know no one here who's aghast of your great words. Give me your jizarm, then." Remember, that's an axe. "For the love of God, and gladly I'll grant you the gift you have asked to be given." Lightly, the king himself leaped down and clutched it in his hand. Then quickly, that other lord alighted on his feet. Arthur lay hold of the axe. He gripped it by the handle. He swung it up over him sternly, as if to strike. The stranger stood before him in stature higher by a head or more than any man here in the house. Sober and thoughtful, he stood there and stroked his beard. And with patience like a priest's, he pulled down his collar, no more unmanned or dismayed by Arthur's might than if he'd been some baron on the bench, and brought him a glass of wine. Then Gawain at Guinevere's side made a sign to the king. "I beseech you, sire," he said, "let this game be mine." "Now, if you, my worthy lord," said Gawain to the king, "would command me to step from the dais and stand with you there, that I might without bad manners move down from my place, though I couldn't, of course, if my liege lady disliked it," referring to Guinevere, "I'd be deeply honored to advise you before all the court, for I think it unseemly, if I understand the matter, that challenges such as this churl has chosen to offer be met by your majesty." Remember churl? That was in the Wife of Abigail. "Much as it may amuse you, your majesty, when so many bold-hearted barons sit about the bench. No men under heaven, I am sure, are more hardy in will, or better in body on the fields where battles are fought. I myself am the weakest, of course, and in wit the most feeble. My life would be least missed if we let out the truth. Only as you are my uncle have I any honor. For accepting your blood, I bear in my body slight virtue. And since this affair that has befallen us here is so foolish, and since I have asked for it first, let it fall to me. If I've reasoned incorrectly, let all the court say without blame. The nobles gather round, and all advise the same. Let the king step down, and give Sir Gawain the game." So Gawain eventually steps down to take his challenge. The I wanted to point out that here he says, remember we were looking in this first part of the story for those traits of a knight, those virtues of the code of chivalry, saying that he is the weakest, in wit the most feeble, that his life would be least missed. This is an example of Gawain being humble. He's saying everyone here is stronger than me, but still I will stand up. He's showing humility. So Arthur grants Gawain's request to take on the Green Knight. The Green Knight asks Gawain to identify himself, and the two agree on their pact. Gawain then prepares to strike his blow against the Green Knight. Remember, whatever he does to the Green Knight is going to do to him a year and a day later. On the ground, the Green Knight got himself into position, his head bent forward a little, the bare flesh showing, his long and lovely locks laid over his crown, so that any man there might note the naked neck. Sir Gawain laid hold of the axe and hefted it high. His pivot foot was thrown forward before him on the floor, and then swiftly he slashed at the naked neck. The sharp of the battle blade shattered asunder the bones and sunk through the shining fat and slit it in two, and the bit of the bright steel buried itself in the ground. The fair head fell from the neck to the floor of the hall, and the people all kicked it away as it came near their feet. The blood splashed up from the body and glistened on the green, but he never faltered or fell for all of that. But swiftly, this is he being the Green Knight, he started forth upon stout shanks and rushed to reach out where the king's retainers stood, caught hold of the lovely head, lifted it up, and leaped to his steed and snatched up the reins of the bridle, stepped into stirrups of steel, and striding aloft, he held his head by the hair, high in his hand, and the stranger sat there as steadily in his saddle as a man entirely unharmed, although he was headless on his steed. He turned his trunk about, that baleful body bled, and many were faint with fright when all his say was said. So keep in mind, Gawain just cut his head off. His head fell on the floor, and all the people at the feast started like playing soccer with it underneath the table. But the body never fell to the ground. It just turned and stomped over to where the head was and picked it up by the hair. So now he's holding his own head aloft, and now the head is going to turn and speak. He held his head in his hand up high before him. There's some good alliteration. Addressing the face to the dearest of all on the dais. That's a raised platform where the king sits. And the eyelids lifted wide, and the eyes looked out, and the mouth said just this much, as you may now hear. Look that you go, Sir Gawain, as good as your word, and seek till you find me as loyally, my friend, as you've sworn in this hall to do in the hearing of the knights. Come to the Green Chapel, I charge you, and take a stroke the same as you've given, for well you deserve to be readily requited on New Year's morn. Many men know me, the Knight of the Green Chapel, therefore if you seek to find me you shall not fail. Come, or be counted a coward, as is fitting. Then with a rough jerk he turned the reins and haled away through the hall door, his head in his hand, and the fire of the flint flew out from the hoofs of the foal. To what kingdom he was carried no man there knew, no more than they knew what country it was he came from. What then? The king and Gawain there laugh at the thing and grin, and yet it was an affair most marvelous to men. So why do they laugh? Can you hear that laugh? This man just did not die and carried his head out of the castle, and they just turn and look at each other. This it's most marvelous. They can't believe what they just saw. They're like, what just did you? Whew. Well, that was crazy. I'm thinking it's that kind of laughter. All right, so remember to look back over these questions. Which of the seven major virtues does he display at the feast? We talked about how he shows humility. Go back and see if he shows some others. And then you will tune in on the next lesson for the end of the story.